Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have a review of the finale episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now there will be spoilers in this review, so I'll just warn you now, just in case you haven't yet caught up with all the previous episodes throughout this series. So we pick up overall from last week where John Walker had been dismissed and disgraced by the government following his murder of Lamar's killer. Zemo had been apprehended by the Wakandians. Sam and Bucky had a heart-to-heart, and Sam had started training with the Shield, and he received a new briefcase which we all knew was made by the Wakandians, and this is very much hinting that he would become the next Captain America. And Carly and her group had begun their final plans to apprehend all of the politicians within the committee meeting. So we go overall to the finale episode itself, and I think overall it's certainly a very fast-paced, energetic and action-packed episode. It certainly wrapped up all of the dangling threads that were left previously from the 5th episode of the show, and it was a solid, if not overall spectacular conclusion, I think, to the series. So if we go particularly over the events quickly, we saw at the beginning of the episode Carly and her gang had began their operation to target all the politicians at the committee, as I mentioned before. And of course, going into this episode, the main highlight that everybody was anticipating was the first reveal from Sam in the new Captain America outfit. Was he indeed going to be Captain America, or would it have just been an upgraded version of his already Falcon costume, which we had seen been damaged by John Walker in the previous episode? And of course it turned out to be the Captain America outfit, and I think in terms of how he looked, I thought it was a very good rendition of the costume. It does get a bit used to when you first see him in the scenes when he's flying in the sky and then he crashes through the window and he stands in the building. But after a while you get used to seeing the suit in live action, which is always the case when you see a costume for the first time. You just get used to it, and once you see Sam fighting and flying through, it looks very cool. And I always love the MCU, and this is one of the biggest elements why I support it so much, is how they really do look to embrace the look and the aesthetic from the original comic books. And if you compare the comic book version of this costume to Sam's live action take, it really is very close to the comic book interpretation, so I'm very glad about that. And we got very good action sequences where we see Sam using his really constructed wings and he's flying through. He has his miniature device that's telling him about whether the people have been flight trained within the helicopter, and it was almost reminiscent of the opening sequence that we got from the first episode when he's flying with the helicopters in the canyons, and this time he's flying through the building. So I thought Anthony Mackie looked very good in the costume, and like I said, it's always great to see Marvel adapts the source material. They were also very clever in having him fight in certain red lights or filming at night time. So again, it kind of hid the costume as such, as opposed to having it in daylight. So very clever scene setting. The episode throughout is really more of a thrilling battle against Carly and their forces. We see both Sam and Bucky in multiple scenes helping people out as they take the fight to Carly's gang. We see the emergence of Sharon once again. And we also get John Walker, who we saw at the end of the previous episode, obviously traumatized by the death of Lamar. We had the end credit scene where he was constructing the shield, obviously not out of vibranium. And I think this was the laughable part of the episode, because we get the confrontation between John and Carly, and he throws the shield at Carly and she just kicks it away. And the shield itself really looks like a rust bucket version as opposed to the vibranium version that we're used to seeing overall. So again, just great action, and we see John Walker getting involved, saving people in the truck along with Bucky as well. Clearly John Walker, whatever intensities that he had in the previous episodes, he managed to get over them and become the heroic character that he had set out to be from the beginning of this series. And then we go on later on to a meeting between Carly and Sharon, and it's revealed, as many predicted, that she was the power broker all along. Again, I wasn't very convinced by this development. I wasn't convinced by the whole power broker thing in the first place, to be honest. And I think it's one of the few issues with this episode that they really didn't follow through and develop properly. But we also learned that Carly had trained with Sharon to begin with before going rogue, so that was an interesting development. I would have preferred to see some sort of flashback scenes between the two. I think it would have fleshed out Carly's character a bit more, but we didn't have time at this point within the finale. She eventually shoots the spy who was really planted in to check up on Carly over time, and then we get a tense fight between Falcon and Carly overpowers Falcon because, of course, she has the serum inside her. Falcon doesn't have the serum inside him. And then it looks like Carly is going to shoot Falcon, and then Sharon takes her out as well. And then we get an emotional moment when we see Falcon taking Carly's dead body over to the press in a hospital, and they're all outside. And then we get the great speech from Sam when he talks about governments working together and not feeling about being the person who's abused, and that we've all got to come together. In the beginning, it was very sincere and it was a very well-grounded moment, and I thought Anthony Mackie performed this part very well. It did get a bit overindulgent. There was a point when I was like, okay, they're laying on this speechifying about him a bit too thick, and I think they needed to just cut it a bit, because I can already imagine a lot of people who get triggered by any kind of woke elements or social injustice elements within any shows. They're going to pick this scene apart in particular. Overall, it didn't really spoil the overall flow of the episode, but I just felt it was a bit over the top and maybe a bit too much. They could have reined it in a bit, but I think Anthony Mackie performed very well throughout this scene, and not only that, throughout this whole episode as well. And yes, I think it was well intentions throughout the episode. And then we get, of course, the smiles by both Bucky as well and Sharon, acknowledging the fact that now Sam has taken on the role as Captain America, and we see him talking towards the press. And then we get that moment when one of the press guys acknowledges the fact that he is the new Captain America, and he tells them of future incidents, and then Sam flies off. So yeah, we're just established now that he is the Captain America going forward. How this will play out in future installments of the MCU, we will have to wait and see. And then we get the development near the end of the episode where we see the last remaining group of Carly's group. They get taken away in a police van, but then that van explodes. So essentially they were all wanted to be taken out. We get a latter scene where we see I think her name is Valerie, the character that showed up at the end of the previous episode, where she offered to help out John Walker, of course. Now, many people have hinted at, is she another member of Hydra, a secretive underground operation, or does she have any other agendas? We wait and see, I guess, find out in future shows and films throughout the MCU. And then we get the development near the end where we see that she introduces John Walker as the US agent. She's sitting there with his wife, and he struts out in a new black costume. Again, as I mentioned before with Falcon, very comic book accurate. Again, this is what I love about the MCU so much, and that they really do take into account the source material. We had the earlier scene where we saw Baron Zemo trapped in that underwater prison, the raft. If you remember, we saw that from the Captain America Civil War, and that was one thing I questioned as well, because I thought Zemo was apprehended by the Wakandians, so why wasn't he kept in Wakanda? Right, because if you, of course, go by Captain America Civil War, he was responsible for T'Challa's death, so I would have felt that they would have taken him in and kept him in Wakanda. So that was something I queried. And then we then get to the scene that I think a lot of viewers were expecting, when Bucky, who we all know has gone through this journey in trying to recognise and atone for his previous sins as the Winter Soldier, he finally plucks up the courage to visit the father of the son that he had killed when he was in the role as Winter Soldier, and he acknowledges what he had done and his previous mistakes. Now, I felt this scene was a bit flat. I think this really needed to be much more of a longer scene, much in the same fashion that we got from the 5th episode when we had the scenes between Sam and Asaya. I think it really needs to be a far more longer and weightier and impactful scene, very much like we got as well with John Walker when he visited Lamar's parents and told him about their deaths. This was really the critical scene in the whole arc and journey of Bucky, and it kind of really got glossed over because we were at the end of the finale now. Everything was kind of in much more of a montage mode, and I think I was a bit disappointed by this, and he really needed to expand on this scene a bit more. So it did feel a bit flat, even though the intentions were well made. And then we get to Sam and Isaiah when he visits him at his house again, and this is where they did make much more of an impact, because Sam takes Asaya and his son, I think it is, to the original Museum of Heroes that we've seen right throughout the MCU, and then he shows Asaya's original statue of when he was the first super soldier has been fully restored, and Sam acknowledges that Asaya's role will never be forgotten about. And that was a very heart moment when we see Asaya embracing Sam. And yes, there was a sense of emotion and heartfeltness that was built out throughout the scene. So this was very well done as well. I did like this scene overall. It was a very good moment. And then we get a much more of an upbeat montage where we see Sam returning to his family, taking all the photos of all the kids. We see Bucky returning. I love all the scenes where they're hanging off Bucky's arm, taking pictures of him. Again, I like that brightness and hopefulness that we see right the way through all of the MCU. I think that's great little character moments throughout on here. Nice little music. And then we just get the closing scenes where we see Sam and Bucky just hand in hand together, walking off, and that's great as well. It's really established the friendship and the bond that the two have built up right throughout the whole story of the series. That was very handled very well, and I think overall the episode, as I mentioned at the start of this review, was rounded off very well. I was primarily concerned. I thought the 5th episode maybe left too many opening holes, but they managed to consolidate together very well. Now, there were a few issues, and I think not only of the episode itself, but the entire series, and that was the role of Carly. Now, I've never been convinced by her as an antagonist. She was always to and from, back and forth. She wasn't really fully convinced in her convictions at times. I think had she been a bit more assertive, she could have easily achieved what her and her group set out to do. They were really trying to make her much more of a sympathetic, conflicted villain, but it just never worked. She never really had the imposing nature and carried the threat levels that I think throughout the series. I've just never convinced. She's just too young to be able to command the full attention of this group that she was involved in. So I was never convinced by her as the main antagonist. Nothing against the actress involved. And I also questioned Sharon's role, and we'll get to that as well. The end credit scene where we saw that Sharon had been receiving her pardon from the government for obviously aiding in combating the threats overall. And then we get that slow motion sequence and we see that Sharon isn't maybe perhaps all that she seems, and she makes the phone call to tell whoever she's speaking to that, okay, the super soldiers are off the table, but now she's got access all to the government secrets. Now, I believe that this is planting the seeds for Secret Invasion. I think that maybe she is perhaps a Skrull, and we'll find out later on in perhaps the Secret Invasion series that I think is due to start filming very shortly. We know that we'll see the return of Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury in the role, and of course we will see the Skrulls who we saw in the beginning of Captain Marvel movie. They will make an appearance as well. So that's what I think this is. I think Sharon has somehow been maybe killed or duplicated earlier on without the story, and that's what I think it is. Because if you go throughout the whole series, particularly in this episode, there was just something wasn't right about Sharon, just her dark nature about her. She just didn't seem completely good in nature, and the fact that she was the power broker as well, we saw early on in the episode she was able to disguise identities as well. So where she got the technology for that, I don't know, but I think something else is to be fully explored with Sharon's role, and I think they left that dangling, and that's why I think it will lead to the Secret Invasion. There was something not quite right about the whole power broker arc. Again, it wasn't very convincing overall. So yes, that's really it in terms of the summary of the Falcon and Winter Soldier. There was no secondary end credit scene like what we saw with WandaVision overall, and like I said before, I think they concluded it very well. It was solid, it was tight, it was easy to follow, very well put together. There was no real exhilarating moments, no high watermarks, big money scenes or sequences throughout this episode overall, but it just went along at a nice, easy, competent pace, and I don't think you can knock it down too much from that. I think overall I found it to be a superior series to WandaVision because I think it stayed consistent throughout its entire run, whereas WandaVision, if we're being honest, really didn't get going to the 4th episode, and that could have really been a 6-episode arc, just like the Falcon and Winter Soldier did. I don't know what will happen with Baron Zemo, whether he will come back. A lot of people are hinting the fact that John Walker's new role will maybe lead to the Thunderbolts, which was a kind of a secret operative group that was led by Thunderbolt roles, I think, in the comics as well. So they've left that door open to go forward. Another disappointing aspect for me throughout this episode was the role of John Walker. Up until episode 5, he was really the most intense and compelling character as well, and I was hoping that they would take him on a far more darker path, and maybe we could see further effects of the super shoulder serum. But to have him just go straight back to the kind of good-natured role straight away and get his career back, I just felt was a bit underwhelming overall. There was far more elements they could have taken with that character, and they just had them just become this kind of routine character at the end. Did the soldier serum run out? He didn't seem that powerful in the fight against Carly's forces as well. So I don't know whether they will give him a new formula going ahead forward. We will wait and see as well. But that was the only other really disappointing element for me. And what was, like I said before, a very solid episode. And I think overall a very solid series. I enjoyed this one, like I said, overall. Maybe they weren't standout episodes, but I think I found it to be very compelling. Very good performances and chemistry once again between both Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan. I loved all the journey and arcs that we saw from both Falcon and Bucky throughout this series as well. And he wasn't really established as the true Captain America because obviously he hasn't got the super soldier serum, so he's still Falcon. I think I see him as, even though he's got the new costume as well. Whether we will get a season 2 of this, we'll wait and see. If you notice at the end of the episode, they changed the title card from Falcon and the Winter Soldier to Captain America and the Winter Soldier. So we will wait and see whether we do get a season 2 overall. But overall, no, I was very pleased, very satisfied with this finale. And I think it's another solid entry within the MCU. Some may argue that they still need to kind of step their game up. Maybe some people were disappointed with WandaVision as well. But I think this was a step up from WandaVision, and it'll be interesting to see where we go next in terms of Loki as well. And then shortly after that, we of course get Black Widow, which is coming on July the 9th in both theatres and Disney Plus as well. So those are my thoughts and feelings and review on the finale episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Let me know what you think in the comments below. How do you think it compared to WandaVision overall in terms of its finale and also in terms of its overall episode run? Did you think it benefited from the fact that it was only 6 episodes as opposed to the 9 episodes of WandaVision? Did you find that this series got into its story a lot more earlier and was able to consistently hold your attention, even though it was a much more of a grounded adventure this time as opposed to the fantasy elements of WandaVision? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And hopefully when Loki comes out, we will see a much more improvement even further within the MCU. And of course, I'll provide reviews for that as well. So please also hit those like and subscription and notification buttons in order to help me provide you with more high quality content and reviews like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves. Stay at safe distances. And I will see you very, very soon.